I'm very thrilled to be here. And yesterday we had a very inspiring day in Jerusalem. And I hope by this talk to link some of the complexity thinking to the practice of placemaking and dealing with citizens in an urban planning context. The title of my lecture is Spatial Planning in an Age of Active Citizenship. And I always use this picture of the dancers, and I will, through the presentation, it become clear why I use that metaphor. But first, why did I start this research? Well, I saw two things happening in the same time, and I have to say that my reference, the context in which I did this research was Northern and Western Europe. But I can see the same trends also, for instance, here in Jerusalem, but also in Southern and Eastern Europe. But I have to say that I deal from a certain perspective, so please take that into account while listening. Two things happening at the same time. At one hand, you see much more active citizens in cities, people engaged in how does my city look, what does my city look like, what plans I actually make, how do I think about that, but also people actually interfering within their cities, making pocket parks or building their own homes, which is in the Netherlands a very unusual thing to do, so that's a contextual thing. But also developing, for instance, the street libraries, people actually just on their own streets interfering within public space. This is really an emerging trend that we see across many countries. And on the other side, you see governments applauding this development, talking about social innovation. That's some term that the European Union likes to use a lot, but also in America it's used very much. The Dutch government likes to talk about participatory society and active citizenship, addressing these kinds of citizens. And all through many countries you see a growing appreciation of, or awareness or attention for the potential of civil society. So, okay, we have an emerging trend from various sides coming up. And here I included some pictures of actually some European networks that I'm engaged in of placemakers across Europe. So you see people that work in their own neighborhoods and they connect on an international level as well to exchange experiences. So, well, an emerging trend, you could say. However, where's the planner? I think that the planner has still some hard time dealing with this trend, or is actually trying to figure out what to do with it. And planning it's not new in urban planning to actually deal with citizens. We've been doing that for quite some years, quite some history in that. And still we find it quite challenging. What does placemaking or what does civic initiative mean to us? And therefore I would like to make a distinction between two kinds of civic engagement, so working with residents, with people in neighborhoods. One is citizen involvement, which actually means that you as a, for instance, public authority, you have a certain program running, or you're developing a plan and you want people to participate and think along in your program. Sometimes just in the form of public hearings, so you present your plans and they can respond. Sometimes in the form of actual negotiations or co-creation, and sometimes in the form of participatory budgeting, where you actually allow a certain budget for people to apply to develop their initiatives. This is all citizen involvement, so people part of your policy processes. On the other hand, you have civic initiatives, which are not necessarily connected to your ongoing policy processes. They can be something entirely different. They can all of a sudden propose something that you as a planner have never thought of, or that actually oppose some of your policy ideas that you have. And sometimes they can be fully in line, but you just haven't thought about it. And actually for this kind of civic initiatives, there is not so much I could also say there's a growing awareness that we should pay attention to that, and also looking for instruments and methods in order to deal with that. Because the problem of the above is that somehow the processes are then always framed by the professionals, and by our professional framing or our process design, we include and exclude certain people. We also saw that yesterday during some cases. By making a process design, for instance, having meetings in the evening, some people can participate and other people cannot. By coming from a certain community yourself as a planner, some people will relate to you and come to your processes, and some people say like, oh, I'm not going to talk to the authorities. So, you know, that kind of process design really influences the group that you actually engage with. And civic initiatives can move a bit beyond that inclusion and exclusion process. And in order to understand better what these civic initiatives are, I take a look at complexity. So that's where the complexity comes in. And I wanted to understand, okay, how do these civic initiatives grow, and how do they develop and expand and become robust over time? Things like that. And for that, I used the notion of self-organization, which we already heard in the 2 previous lectures, which basically means, I think, the most general definition that you could have. It had its emergence of patterns or spontaneous emergence of order out of disorder due to internal drivers, local interactions, and lack of centralized control. However, using this definition, you can still understand that or use it as a planner in different ways. And this is a little bit more theory on top of the theory you already heard. I'm sorry for that, but I will try to explain by using some examples. The first way you can use self-organization, I think, is very illustrative in the 2 examples that we've just had. It's a way of explaining urban form. And you can use that, for instance, as a researcher in a more representative way. So you look at cities and you explain the form that is emerging. And you can also use that more performative in a way of speculating what future developments could be, for instance. So then you think more about the future, and you're more like a proactive, like planning is. So the first one is you have a system and you look at it and you say, okay, this is the emerging pattern and it might go in that direction. Very interesting, but in order to explain how a civic initiative actually works and how it emerges, can I say I parked that in English? In Dutch we have an expression, I parked my car, saying that you're not going any further in that direction. So I did that with that branch of theory. The second one is transition systems, which is also a way of looking at a system that's somehow located outside you. For instance, you're looking at a flock of birds or a city that has emerged. And you think, okay, this system has a certain function, but I want to change it a little bit. I want to tweak it a little bit. And then you actually go looking for the details, looking for the niches that already showcase some of that change, and you start to try to interfere in that. And this you can also do in a representative way. You look at a system, you describe the niches, and you can do it more in a performative way, that you actually start interfering, pushing some initiatives a little bit further, some not so much further, so really influence the system with the hope that you can actually influence some system change or evoke some system change. Also very interesting, also in the context of civic initiative, we had a discussion about it yesterday as well. Do civic initiative actually change the system, or do they not yet? But also this one I parked because first I wanted to understand the mechanism of these civic initiatives themselves. So then I turned to the third way you can actually use self-organization of complexity, and that is the emergence of up-to networks. And in up-to networks, you actually look at the relationships people have with each other, with their buildings, with their environments, and you somehow see them as interacting networks. For instance, the ants, I think you can very well explain in the form of up-to networks. There's one ant walking away, I'm just using an example, sorry for that, but there's one ant and it encounters some food and it sends some pheromones, and the other ant comes and it connects to the food as well, and then they start carrying the food together, and then they leave each other again. So that's like up-to networks. They can change continuously. And again, you can use that in a performative, in a representative way, in the form of describing the up-to networks that you see in a city. For instance, which people use this square and how do the people relate to that, and how, well, things like that. But you can also use that in a more performative way by actually engaging in the emergence of civic initiatives. And I think this is where also the placemaking comes in, because then you start actually interfering or engaging in the emergence of civic initiative to try to make that happen. So that's the branch of theory that I took a little bit further. So yeah, there's a red line saying that I did. And then I understood civic initiatives as intrinsically driven, emerging and performative community-based networks of citizens and entrepreneurs mostly local actors, you could say it in that way, trying to take care of their neighborhood. I had some more theory. Well, when you take that branch of theory, you can actually make use of some work of some well-known philosophers. And I'm just giving some quotes of them to illustrate how I find their work inspirational. Gilles Deleuze, for instance, says that becoming a self is continuously. There is no being beyond becoming. And I liked that phrase very much because it somehow expresses that an initiative, it emerges, an idea is born, and then it changes into something different. And then it again becomes something different. We have examples in the Netherlands of people building their houses together, and then after they finish the houses, they start a theater together, or they start doing renewable energy, and they start to incorporate all kinds of different things. And sometimes things are started in a certain way, and they end up something completely different. So this is like really a continuous process of becoming or becoming other. Lyotard said that a self, so I interpreted that as an initiative, and a self is formed in a very complex and dynamic networks of interactions and relations. So such a civic initiative, such an emerging self is never entirely autonomous. It's always connected to its environment and its response to that. And actually the people that it encounters and the rules that it encounters and the situations it encounters also forms the initiative. And then the third philosopher, Jacques Derrida, said a self is formed by expressing what it is not. And I also found that quite relevant because in the civic initiative, at least the ones that I encountered, people always have a tendency to say like, we are quite unique, we are not about this, or we want to change this and this and this. So they always have some kind of like way of expressing, I should say, saying what they are about is by also saying what you are not about. So distinguishing yourself from the environment. So that was most of the theory. These are the cases that I actually applied the theory to. And like I said, these were cases from Denmark, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. So in a very, I'd say, peaceful environment and very consensus-based societies. So please make your own translation to some of the complexities that we have seen yesterday. But I will give a brief explanation. Co-housing in Denmark, people building their own homes together. In the Netherlands, it's actually a very unusual thing. In Denmark, it's a bit more usual. I think in large parts of Europe, it's a very natural thing to do, actually, to build your own home. But that's a phenomenon that I looked at. How do these people find each other? How do they organize? How do they encounter with the planners? Another example that I used were the business improvement districts. These are entrepreneurs somehow forming collectives in the streets or in the neighborhoods, gathering money in the form of taxes among each other and then using that money for placemaking activities, for instance a square, or plantings in the streets, or marketing activities, festivals, things like that, but also from collective organization. And then the third, I looked in Almere, which is a medium-sized city in the Netherlands, people taking care of the green in their neighborhood, designing a park, having a pop-up shop, but also doing some co-houses. So these were more mixed initiatives. And then I had several questions. The first question was, okay, under what conditions do these initiatives emerge? I mean, how do they come about? How do they grow? How do they start? And then I found there are different kinds of conditions that give rise to them. There are, of course, conditions that are more or less the intrinsic drivers of the initiative. For instance, a lack of qualitative urban space, public space, or a lack of housing, or a lack of green in a neighborhood, or a lack of something. So if there's something that you want to change, which is very local, very related to yourself, very important. Then, of course, there's general planning legislation that somehow says and defines what you can and what you cannot do, which is also important, because you want to have permission at a certain point for your initiative, things like that. So that's also an important condition. And then what you saw very strongly in the countries that I looked at is that national government, but also local governments, promote active citizenship a lot. So that was also a condition which is not really place-based, it's more like a sort of like generic societal feeling or idea or policy or fashion, you could also call it. Also quite important, but the most important condition was actually, okay, people start with an idea, with something that they want to change, want to achieve, But then this was actually the most crucial one in getting an initiative going. And that was the presence of people that were actually able to recognize some of the potential of the initiatives and were willing to experiment. And whether this willingness to experiment existed depends a lot on the personality of the people, but also, of course, the policy context in which they work. So the first idea needs to be picked up by people who can actually, see the experiment and make it go further. So then the question is, who are these people? Well, I think we saw some of them yesterday, and we have some of them in the room as well. But what do they do? Who are these people, and what do they do? Well, first they constantly connect, and they constantly look for opportunities to connect as well. In the cases I looked at, they are from a civic background, they are from a public background, they are sometimes from a business background, sometimes from an NGO background. And actually, in most of the cases, you need to have some kind of hybrid between them. So just I call them navigators, just a navigator from a public side is not going to work. He or she needs to meet a navigator from the civic side as well, or from the business, so it always needs to be some kind of hybrids. In the theory, in the literature, there's this name for that's often used, that's called boundary spanners. So people that actually are able to think beyond the boundaries of their own organization. So, okay, they think my organization has this, or my interest is this, but I can relate to the interest of the other. Well, I think that's really nice. It's a nice concept. But then when you want to change something in the urban environment, you also have to have a sense of direction, a sense of a goal, a purpose. So that's why I changed boundary spanners into navigators, because then I think it has more of a direction, more of a goal orientation. But then, okay, we have these navigators that are crucial in making a civic initiative established, but then what do these people do? And this is where the dancing actually comes in. Among these cases, by use of the theory, I also identified 4 types of behavior. And I used some examples of dance to explain these behaviors. First you have decoding. And the way I like to, with the dance metaphor, I like to express, you have this like field of dancers that's more or less like moving, no, not more or less, that is exactly moving in the same kind of way, the ballet, they also call that. The dancers all making exactly the same movements, and then all of a sudden one dancer starts doing something else. So it starts to distinguish itself from the crowd. This is decoding, and related to civic initiative, you could say like, everybody accepts a certain situation until someone says, hey, I want to make a difference, I want to change a certain situation. I want to take care of that green, I want a pocket park, so that's the decoding. I will use a certain sequence, but I want to emphasize that they're not subsequential. So they can happen, these behaviors can happen in every sequence that you can imagine. But imagine that once a person has decoded, it starts to expand. It starts to look for allies. It starts to look for resources. How do I collect the money, the allies, people who want to join my initiative? How many ideas can we generate? Really creating diversity in order to choose in the end, to make decisions, to focus on the things that you really, really like. And again, the dance metaphor, expansion is really about making your body bigger and extending and stretching your body really. But contraction is more a get together, also a form that's used in modern dance a lot. And then the last is coding. And coding is actually about becoming part of the crowd again, becoming normal again. Saying like, I want to have my street library, and it's just like the street library in Boston, and it's just like the street library in the other neighborhoods. Look, I'm not so different, I just want to be like them. Or it's about making use of certain legislation, saying like, okay, I know that my initiative is really different and provocative, but we can fit it into a legal plan, so, I'm not that different, I'm normal, you can accept me. So these are 4 kinds of behaviors that you can actually see in these civic initiatives emerging. And some, they start with coding. So some people, for instance, in the business improvement districts, I saw starting to say like, okay, that's really cool what they have in that neighborhood and the law they use. We want to use that law in our neighborhood as well. and then the process kind of stopped because there was no sense of urgency, and the process only continued a few years later when other entrepreneurs in the neighborhood started to say like, well, okay, the crisis is really affecting us and we really want to change our environment, so we can actually relate to decoding. So then you can see that one kind of behavior sort of like needs the other as well to be able to move forward. And then this is the last scheme. Because, okay, we have now 4 types of behavior that you can recognize in civic initiatives, but behavior is just behavior. Behavior is about nothing really, at least I think in the planning context. Behavior starts when there are also intentions behind that behavior. And again, both a combination from the literature and the cases that I looked at, I identified 3 types of intentionalities that actually make people starting to do things. And these intentionalities are interfering for a change, so wanting to make a difference. The second one is more or less like, you know, trying to find a fit between various interests and trying to make a connection and sort of like following the flows of things. And then the third one is assembling to maintain, protecting the community, making people come together, strengthening a certain neighborhood. So really strengthening also some existing situation, emphasizing that. And when you match that with the 4 types of behavior, you actually end up with 12 archetypes of planning, I have called them. And of course, this one is a very logical one. So you decode, you say, I want to have something different, and I'm going to show how that difference looks like. So then you start, for instance, guerrilla gardening is a very easy example. You do some illegal gardening in order to say this space could actually be green. So that's decoding, interfering for change. And on the other side of the spectrum is also quite a logical one. It says, I want to maintain this situation as it is, and I'm going to use codes in order to establish that. That's, for instance, making a legal plan, saying this is allowed in a certain situation and it is not allowed in a certain situation, really to protect a certain situation. But then there's a whole hybrid of behavior, of archetypes in between. For instance, people that explore a lot of different options in the hope that they can somehow find a way to match different interests. Or people that think of new rules, hoping that these new rules will actually change some things in the environment. Or what else can I say? People that say, I want to stand for my community and I want to make my community stronger, and therefore we should change certain things. And these are all kinds of, here are the people, for instance, that think, that say like, okay, we have this system of regulation, and we feel that in order to create some kind of project here, we need to tweak some rules and we need to find a way around, and then we'll find some way of establishing a project. So all kinds of different types of planners, you could say. Then I looked at the cases that I described earlier, and don't pay too much attention to the colors, etc., because the only impression I wanted to give with this picture was that in every case you can see different kinds of archetypes coming back. So there was never, one case being archetypically some kind of only located in one kind of behavior. It was also always several people showcasing different kinds of archetypes and combining that into projects. And it's an hypothesis, but I would actually say that you would need at least 3 or 4 different kinds of behaviors in your initiative in order to make it work and to make it move forward. And then something else that I wanted to test was, okay, how is the division between planning authorities and civic initiators, so people that are really on the civic side? Because at first I assumed that, okay, public authorities are probably just on this side, and then the civic initiatives are probably just on this side. But of course, things are always more complex than you expect them to be. You can actually see that, okay, there is some predominance of authorities in the coding field, but you can actually see these 2 worlds also intertwining in the middle, and sometimes even the government saying like, okay, we really need to decode, and also civic initiatives really focusing on establishing rules, making things fixed and stable for the benefit of the community. Okay, and then I'll come to the last part. With this scheme of these behaviors, what I wanted to emphasize is that civic citizens or residents who actually take an initiative can be located anywhere in this field, and so can public planners who take an initiative. They can be located anywhere in this field. They just start from a certain archetype, certain behavior, and they start meeting other people who somehow complement their own, way they act. And therefore, I would like to introduce the flat ontology, which somehow means that individuals who act in space are ontologically the same. And with that, I mean that, of course, they come from a different background. Coming from a public authority background can be something entirely different than coming from a civic background. The community you are determines your background, determines your interests very much. But when you just look at the behavior and the intentionalities that people have, they can be flat, they can be equal, they can be the same, they can differ. But if you look at the individuals who are acting in these networks and you look at them in a flat way, I think there's a much more easier way to understand each other's behavior. So instead of looking as a professional planner, looking at the citizen and saying, oh, you're a citizen, so you don't have any education in planning, and you just have your local interest in the neighborhood, and I'm the professional planner, and I know what is good for this neighborhood. You can also approach that person and thinking like, okay, this person tries to make a difference for his or her community, and I would like to be a bit more regulating because I think that this neighborhood is very unregulated and I think this is not a good thing. So you can really start approaching people from their intentionalities and their behavior. And I think this might be helpful in improving the interaction and the relationships between planning and planners, professional planners and civic initiators. And then the last question is, okay, very nice, you have all these individual initiatives emerging, and you as a planner, you help them and you facilitate them and you make them grow, but then what happens? And then this is again more like a hypothesis that I would like to work on further as well. But I think as a planner, you can also have a role in trying to create some consistency between initiatives. Trying to look, okay, this initiative wants to go in that direction, that initiative wants to go in that direction. Maybe we can bridge that somehow without, trying to create consensus, but really respecting differences, but trying to somehow make them move into the same direction. Or sometimes you can help an initiative by which is really focused on one kind of behavior by adding some new kinds of behavior to that. So really creating consistency among initiatives in order to, overall and together improve the quality of cities. And here's a dance metaphor again, and this is my last slide. What I think that might emerge then, when you have this multiple initiatives emerging within cities, is very much describable as a Baroque harmony. We have some music coming along to illustrate that. No, I'm kidding. Towards a Baroque harmony in which different and independent voices are brought together through a web of reciprocal reference, interacting with each other and harmonically interdependent, but never losing one's individuality and independency, rhythm and couture. With that I mean that as a planner you don't look for consensus, you don't look too much for agreement or a dissolution, but you really respect all the kinds of different voices that you have in your neighborhood, in your area, and you try to establish some kind of harmony among them, but a harmony that really makes everyone keeps its own individuality and interest. And I think that's a nice and beautiful task for planners to have in this context of active citizenship. So, thank you.
Well, Beitske, thank you very much. It's a really wonderful, wonderful presentation and so thought-provoking. And can you go back to the typology size of
The 12th.
12th, yeah. Either the first or the second. The first better, I think.
Without the dots.
With more the actors. Yeah, this one. No, with the dots.
Okay.
Because I think it's true that. First of all, my first impression seeing it is that true that the action is all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
The coding is important, but you cannot if you continue to decode, then
nothing happens.
you
Yeah.
in a sense, you're destructive. There's a lot of work going on expansion and contraction.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's more contraction than expansion. So expansion is important. You have to get your resources,
Mhm.
but then you have to focus on particular things. Otherwise, nothing gets done.
Mhm.
And then there is a little bit of coding, but mostly in the assembly and maintenance. So I think just looking at that, it tells us so much about the process of how to get things done. If I'm trying to organize a group, then I can even analyze my own actions and going on in terms of this typology, and I understand where I have to put the effort. If there's too much decoding going on, then maybe it's a time for expansion, because I need to get some more people here, because some people will be maybe less prone to decoding. And then if there is just too much chaos going on in the process, let's try to get people focused on specific tasks, so so something actually gets done, before people begin to lose interest. And then once I got a project, okay, now I got to figure out how to maintain it, how to assemble. So this is really a wonderful, wonderful, and also from the point of view of the planner, it also allows you, first of all, when you get into a process that's already going on, you can map it out, see what's happening, and then if you see something missing, and then you can help out instead of trying to impose order. You can help out to help people understand what's going on, what's happening, and allow the order to emerge. Maybe just adding those little pieces that are missing. So I find this amazingly both clear and also very helpful in terms of telling us what to do. Okay, and this is really a tool that you can work with, and in mapping the process, not so much the products, but actually mapping the process and where you are in the process. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other comments? Questions? I'm not sure if you have any insight on this, but do you think there's a difference between who participates, not the planners and the professional side, but the people side? I'm a community worker, so I ask that perspective.
Yeah.
For instance, it's shown that young people are more active in protest and kind of collision tactics when they want something done, and older people who are more well-grounded in the community tend to be more create coalitions, that they have more to lose. It's just one perspective of looking at this, but I was wondering if you have any insight on how people organize to get things done with the professionals, if there's a difference between who participates.
It would be very interesting to dive a little bit deeper in that question, actually do some research or surveys on that, because I think you need data in order to be, but I do have indeed some impressions. Well, one impression that I had was that the people who actually that it's very important for an initiative to do exactly this process, and this contraction and expansion process can actually take quite a long period, whereas this is more or less the first idea that can emerge like a flash of light, and then it's there and it's going there to stay, whereas this process is really one of endurance. And I noticed that in most of the cases that I researched, either people were unexperienced in planning but grew into very experienced planners at the end of the process after that 3 years time, or they were people that somehow had a background that was already connected. They were, for instance, a landscape architect or an architect, or they had a study in environmentals, they had done an environmental study, so they had some kind of like environmental awareness or spatial awareness. But these were not necessarily the people who came with the first ideas, or not necessarily the people who kept the group together. So, and I'm not sure about the young and the older people, but I can totally relate to your idea that maybe, for instance, the cases, the co-housing projects that I looked at, they were mostly started by people who had just finished their study and really wanted to make a point environmentally and about togetherness and community, and then they started these groups. However, I also know some co-housing groups that are established by elderly people who say like, okay, our children have now left the home and we want now to have a different life, but then they are not so, they are perhaps more stronger on the communalized life and not so much about making a difference for society. So I definitely think there could be some correlations here. Also, I found again, when I look at, I did not include them in the study, but I also looked at many cases in Rotterdam, which is my hometown, and there I noticed that again this process is often conducted by people who are quite highly educated. So again, people who know the system, who know the language, who know how to behave, whereas these people have often a more activist background, and this contraction process was much more done by people who are very strongly embedded in the communities and not necessarily having a certain education, but have a very strong network within their area. So there's definitely, but then you could also say because a person has a certain personality, he's an activist and he's also focusing on decoding, and some other people have a certain personality which makes them choose differently in life. But yes, I think there are some patterns, but I only know them by impression. But it would be nice to look further into that. Yeah.
Maybe I missed, but what's the meaning of the colors?
Sorry?
The meaning of the colors.
Oh yeah, it's not that important. But the red ones are the co-housing, and the blue ones are the business improvement districts, and the green ones were the ones from Almere, so more or less the hybrid ones. But yeah. I didn't explain that because I just wanted to give the impression of the multiple set of colors. But so you can actually see that the business improvement districts all have a sort of a light pattern, and the co-housing were much more on this side, and then the Almere were spread over the case. So there's definitely patterns emerging. Yeah.
So we take the two last one and afterwards we move on the rest. And we're here for the
Do you have did you check or ask all the people here the percentage of citizens that are participating in these processes, citizens of the city?
In these cases,
For example.
the co-housing cases of course had everyone in the group participating because they were new projects.
No, I mean
So
in the
that's
city.
in the city.
The city as
Yeah.
a whole.
Well, if I can continue, the business improvement districts, they were mostly for entrepreneurs, so they did not include residents necessarily. Some of them did, some of them didn't, but they were really about establishing community groups among the entrepreneurs. So the intention was not to include the whole neighborhood, but just the businesses. And they had an internal voting system. So every entrepreneur was allowed to vote whether they thought the business improvement district was heading in the right direction. So there was some internal democratic mechanism. And I think the Almere cases are the best examples for your question, because these really took place in the neighborhoods, and some of them were and some of them weren't. There was one case that actually got into trouble because they formed an association, and the association did a survey among the neighborhood, and they thought, or actually they said they had listened to all the residents in the neighborhood, and then they developed a plan out of that, and they presented that plan to the municipality, and the municipality applauded that and said, "Oh, wonderful, you're a really good neighborhood representative," and started to work with them. And then after a while it started to become clear that that was actually not really the case, and there was actually a row within the board of the association, and at the point that the municipality took notice of that, they said, "Okay, we're going to stop all communication with you guys until you solve your own problem, because we are not the mediator in your municipal or in your neighborhood quarrels. We only deal with the person that we believe is representative for the neighborhood." And actually it turned out that the association was abolished, but then the other people started a new association, and they convinced the municipality that they actually did represent the neighborhood, and then they start working again further. But it's always an issue. I mean, it's an issue of being inclusive, and it's always difficult to know whether you really represent the neighborhood as well. And in another case in Almere, it was also the case that actually hundreds of people engaged in the activities a certain organization was organizing in the neighborhood. It all had to deal with the maintenance of green there. And when they organized events, it was like 200-300 people showing up and actually doing the cleaning throughout the whole neighborhood. But then when the board of the association decided to cut some trees because they thought that would also be an improvement for the green, a lot of residents got really, really angry. So that's like continuously tensions emerging, and that's part of the job, I think. And I think also when you look at this tool, that if you notice that more and more people are leaving your initiative or leaving your association because they no longer agree with it, you need to start looking for more, because otherwise you are going to be abolished and not supported, and you can't do your work anymore. So that's looking for allies in your neighborhood or representation is always a continuous process, I think.
Next question.
Yeah, it's just reflecting about the role of planners.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed very much your last statement on that respect. But before you talked about in the early part of the presentation about influencing the systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, the moment that planners try to influence the systems, we are already inside the system. So, and our role becomes also uncertain.
Yeah.
Under this complexity perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. I think I did not include that in the presentation, but I think that I shifted from, okay, you have self-organization in explaining urban form, and then you have self-organization, you try to tweak the system and change it a little bit, and then you have self-organization in the form of engaging in initiatives. But then, of course, there is a way back as well, because while engaging in initiative, of course you influence it, and of course you change the system a little bit. Might not be your goal, your explicit goal, but it will happen. I mean, new order will emerge from that, and then from emerging new order, also new physical forms will, or new urban patterns will emerge as well. So there is definitely a connection between, and I think, well, the whole idea of ordering principles that are emerging out of it. I mean, you can't help as a planner, but also as an individual. All your actions somehow influence and change the. But maybe as planner, you have, especially when you look at the more coding side of it, you can actually try to influence and change some of the systemic conditions that are, more institutional. So.
Marvelous theory for thinking like a mushroom.
Yes, yes, definitely.
No, in every context, I mean, even as a planner, even as a planner working within a state hierarchy, you could understand your actions exactly in a similar way.
Yeah.
Because even the system is also a complex ecosystem with all kinds of intentionalities and all kinds of things happening, and if you want to disrupt the system, as often planners they get there because they want to make a difference, right? So but you have to understand that you cannot just be under the coding. You have to do expansion. You have to find allies. If you can't find them inside your group, you have to get them from other ministries, and then you have to contract. You have to understand what are your opportunities that you can focus on in order to make a change. And then you have to somehow transfer that into the codes of the institution, otherwise it will not last. You have to make it a code. I can explain, for instance, some of my work when I was doing in Ministry of Housing intuitively. I was doing all that. I was really thinking mushroom-like, but now
what I liked very much about the example of the tree and the mushroom is actually how the tree and the mushroom need each other, and that the tree actually directs its actions through the rhizome, through the mushroom, in order to. So that's I was thinking okay, as a hierarchical system, as a planning authority, you actually need the networks in order, and you influence which new things will emerge. So that's
everything becomes formal. Everything collapses. So.
Yeah.
Can I have just one more word? You can also look at it in terms of simplicity, complexity.
Mhm.
Right? Yesterday I was talking about how we actually tend to be more effective when we're thinking simply. And so in many ways decoding is creating simplicity,
Mhm.
is breaking complexity, because if you want to think
Yeah.
about it, the existing system is so complex that nothing gets done and everybody feels powerless. So by decoding, we're actually creating some space for us to work, and in a sense breaking up some of the multiple layers of interconnectivity in
Mhm.
order to allow change to happen. Then expansion is we are creating new complexity. We're bringing in more actors, more creating a network from all different places, and so we're creating new complexity. Contraction is, again, we're going to simplicity. We're concentrating on one thing, we forget everything else, we push everything any way you can, we break the rules, we do everything that we can do just to make the project happen, usually using goodwill of people
Mhm.
that are willing to take risks outside of the codes.
Yeah.
And I have the experience of several projects like this that don't tell me about it, I'll do it, but don't tell me what I'm doing. You weren't here, I didn't see you,
Mhm.
and I didn't give you what you just got. But you still
Yeah.
get things done. And then the coding is you again recreate the complexity,
Mhm.
but in a different way.
Yeah.
Realign things
Yeah.
so they could happen even without you. Because one of the things, again, you started the important role of the navigators.
Mhm.
Nothing happens if there aren't people, and it doesn't matter.
That actually makes things. Yeah.
That's the question. The question that Amir asked
Mhm.
you is the question you always get asked by politicians when you come with an initiative. How many people have you got behind you? Who's behind you? Who do you represent? Okay, this is what when politicians say. Well, why do I need public participation? I'm the embodiment of public participation. So.
And that's the
So the
misunderstanding.
importance of navigators, but you cannot
Mhm.
just rely on navigators for a long time, because one of the characteristics of navigators, they get tired, they lose interest, they want to move on to something else,
Mhm.
and if you don't code it into the system, it kind of disappears after a while. So that's my thought.
Thanks.
Try to tie things together a little bit.
A break.
Thank you.